This panel features emerging venture capital funds led by new fund managers that offer more than just a big checkbook. They bring significant sector expertise, and sometimes, to a lot of founders, that's more important than a big bucket of money. So with that, I want to introduce our first guest. We have Firlej, founder and managing partner at Exposition Fund. Nicholas Nelson, partner, MDOne Ventures. Nicola Sinclair, general partner at Twin Tracks. And moderating this panel is Leah Hodgson, senior VC reporter at Pitchbook. Give them a round of applause.
Well, hi everyone. It's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be moderating this wonderful panel about emerging managers in defense tech. So, given that we've only got 25 minutes, we'll get into it. All three of you have had long careers in the armed forces, with governments, with national security. I thought maybe very briefly you could each kind of explain why you decided to go into VC. Maybe starting with you, Nicola.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I spent 18 and a half years in the system, and I think if you'd said to me 18 and a half years ago you're going to end up working in this space, I'd probably said to you, like, what even is VC? So for me, it's really come out of the experiences I had directly inside the system, working with the community, working with startups, and realising that this was a really underserved space, but that also people working in it were coming from a mixture of backgrounds, and that there weren't that many people coming with a defence background. So yeah, that's why I got involved.
Great.
Somewhat similar. So I've spent 18 years, all of my background in defense, national security, and investing. I kind of came here through a more circuitous route, spent some time in services, and then kind of towards the end of that got really interested at this nexus of what is now colloquially referred to as emerging and disruptive technologies, especially as that was being democratized for good and for ill towards both non-major power states, but as well as asymmetric threat actors such as insurgent or terror groups. And so that's when I went back and kind of started re-skilling, so to speak, and then found my way into M&A, then corporate venture capital, and made my first angel investments before, launching our own fund about 4 years ago now.
Well, I have a slightly different story, to be frank. I was working for the Polish government for about 2 years, and was really passionate about improving some of the policies. And when I had 25 years, Poland, independent Poland since 90s also had 25 years as it happened. And I was a living experiment of so many things that went bad and so many random things that helped me to be present within the government. So in fact, I was really lucky to benefit from the support of individuals in a bad system. And those individuals shaped my career, and I was really grateful for them. And then when I went to Oxford for my education, I thought that I would love to come back at some point to Poland and help to build more structured programs to support talented individuals who can pursue in a positive system change, as opposed to through the random interactions with certain individuals. Then I was captivated by one of my mentors who was from venture capital investing. He taught me a lot about venture. I didn't have a clue what the venture is. I wasn't having any background in finance and so forth. And then I realized that in fact what is venture, what is the definition of venture for me, is that it is a structured, institutionalized form of supporting talented individuals. And I thought that I found my calling, and I would love to do that for the next 20 years at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Europe is the age-old debate, is it better to have a finance background when you enter venture capital, or is it better to have, like yourselves, a specialist background? When it comes to defense tech, how important and how much of an advantage is it to have that kind of knowledge, specialist knowledge of defense? Maybe starting with you, Nicola.
Okay, perfect. I think it's an open question that we're still figuring out right now. I would say one of the biggest gaps in this goes to venture writ large in the European ecosystem is at the partner level. Less than 2% of funds have people, and again, this is agnostic of industry, who have actual hands-on experience as an operator. Now, when you look at defense, which has its own peculiarities and Byzantine acquisition structure, I think it's very tough to succeed and understand this market, particularly at the earliest stages, without significant exposure in there. And that's not, obviously that's my own viewpoint, but when you look at the US market, because that's what we have to compare to, and being half American, I can actually say this with an open mind, I think. There are 34 different funds who would either wholly or predominantly do defense and dual-use technologies in the United States. Some of those, going back to 2015, 2016, are now what we call the third or even fourth vintages, so they're third or fourth fund under the same firms. And the top quartile, in fact the top decile, all are ones who had a founder or at least one half of the founding team come from one of two backgrounds. It's very simple. From the intelligence community or intelligence services, or from the special operations community. Full stop, that's the top decile. So could you succeed outside of that? There are some models that are trying to do that, but I think especially for a nascent ecosystem, I think it's extremely valuable to have that counsel and that understanding.
So when it comes to sourcing deals, as somebody who has that experience in defense, is there a way that is different in the way that you source a deal or the way that you complete an investment rather than like one of the more generalist investors? Maybe Mikolaj, you can answer that.
Yeah, completely. I think to build up on Nicola's point, I think the ecosystem is very nascent, particularly in Europe. In the US, obviously, it's a slightly different dynamic and so forth. But let's say that we contain ourselves only to defense tech ecosystem. It was really, it could be really traced back to the funding date of Anduril, to say 2017, 2018. So we have still very, actually short time frame of the early lessons that we can get. And in Europe, we are lagging behind what is happening obviously in the US. So in Europe, in fact, we have some interesting planted seeds across different communities, but they are wholly not organized in a way that they will provide a structured, good pipeline for venture capital funds. So in a way, that is our responsibility to contribute to that process. And we do that through two types of events in Expositions, and we would like to expand that even more. First is to just bring national security professionals or ex-national security professionals together with talented engineers. We have plenty of them, not just in the UK, but also on the eastern side of NATO flank, and just to mingle and to get to know each other and to move some barriers. And the second type of event is more concentrated and with partnerships with MODs in various countries, particularly with offices of net strategic assessments, where we are putting together 3 companies or 2 companies who are solving one specific problem. Say, for instance, they apply deep learning for intelligence extraction, and so they have a closed-door session, half-a-day event only for MOD employees. But these are just the seeds planted. We need to have more structured processes in place, not just by us and by many other members of that ecosystem, to really generate more high-quality companies in this space.
So are there actual tangible benefits to the startups of having a VC partner, somebody maybe even on the board who has that kind of knowledge? Nicola, is there specific ways that you can add value to your portfolio companies that a generalist investor couldn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what you see in other quite specialised or highly regulated sectors. I think particularly in some of the deep technologies, where you have funds that support them in terms of how they grow, how they find talent, it's not quite the same thing as helping a founder network into that sector and really understand who the decision makers are, who are the influencers, and what are the important and critical aspects of that regulated space. I think these specialist funds like the 3 here today, are really impactful in terms of doing that, but also sorting out some of these things early on, which helps bring in some of the generalists, helps give people confidence in separating out what can be at times quite a crowded space. So I think that, yes, there is a real difference in terms of bringing those generalists in, and I think it's really impactful doing that early on in a company's life cycle.
So obviously all 3 of you are emerging managers. How easy is it to jump into venture capital? How easy is it to set up a fund, and specifically a fund, in a more niche kind of area such as defense tech? Maybe Nicholas, you can take that one.
Sorry, a little trouble hearing. I think it depends on what kind of background you're coming from. What you generally see in any specialist ecosystem, defense is no different, is one kind of 2 general archetypes. The first is someone coming from the services, or maybe with like I referenced earlier, an intelligence or civil service background, who's now trying to break into venture. The second is where you have someone who's coming from more of an investment background, or maybe even a generalist, who's now trying to break into defense. And I think each have different challenges, so I think it's really a very personal answer for any fund. For our fund, we're lucky enough that both myself and my partner, he came from the UK military services, I came from the US defense side, and we had, in between, strong investment experience. Myself as an angel in the CVC, and then within corporate M&A, and him within private equity, that we were able to still have the knowledge to deal with the investment environment, while at the same time bringing kind of that broader skill set together and the networks that are really, I think, critical to succeeding. With that said, it is by no means easy. I think the biggest challenge we had, and still have, I would say, even though we've already closed Fund 1 back in June, and are looking towards Fund 2, is really around the type of LPs. What we have found principally, and the attitudes are changing, but not fast enough, is that there was a lot of interest on the family office side. There's a lot of interest in high net worth individuals. Institutional funds, especially on the continent, but even in the UK, still don't really know what they want to do about defense, or how you define that. We can get to that aspect later, but that was kind of our personal journey. I'm sure everyone has had slightly different journeys, though.
I'd love to comment on that, actually. I think there are two things here that are maybe not dissimilar for emerging managers in other spaces. I think it's around, is your fund thesis and model differentiated? I think that applies universally across emerging managers. And I think, are you a magnet for the sort of founders whose thesis needs to find them back? And again, I think that applies universally against emerging managers. So for me, I'm earlier in my cycle than the other two managers on the stage today, but I think if you can solve those two things, it's then into talking to enough LPs and sorting who's going to be in the first close, who's going to be in Fund 1, and who you're building relationships with later funds. So actually, I don't see my personal experience, despite being in the sector, as being wildly different to other emerging managers. There's still those two key points that I think every fund manager has to solve for first.
Well, I would agree with many that was said. I would also say that much depends on your value proposition to investors. I think predominantly the story has to be honest and has to be true. I think it is all coming down to individuals who are running the fund, and how compassionate they are, how thoughtful they are about the process, and to what extent funders that are meeting GPs share the same kind of values and the same ambition that the GP. When I'm meeting really great funders, I'm often saying that, I'm also a kind of a startup fund. But my really big ambition is not to be another venture capitalist. I want to be one of the best venture capitalists, and I'm not afraid of saying so. And I would like to use the lessons that we have collectively since at least 70s and applying them to defense and intelligence, because I believe that there has to be a differentiated fund in this space that can be a great fund, not just any fund that will rely on some random sovereign money. So that's number one. And the second thing is that I strongly believe that LPs, there is a different set of LPs coming from different countries, and obviously you need to always anchor your fund where there is your home market. This is the layer of legitimacy and validation for any venture capitalist, particularly when they are starting. So I'm lucky in a way now that I'm from Poland, and we live in a country that has a real sense of urgency in this area. Similarly, in Baltics and countries like in Nordics and Finland, Sweden, and so forth, there is much greater sense of urgency there than, for instance, in countries such as in the UK. And also there is more institutional activity now to translate this sense of urgency into the procedures and processes that could help these early stage innovations to go into the government. So I'm lucky in that sense. And we have much more traction from private individuals from there, as opposed to, say, countries like Germany, France, and so forth. And surprisingly, we have good traction in America, which is indeed a special country, because this is the country that, in its DNA, has a business sense of recognizing opportunities. And we're still in Europe, I think we have a lot to catch up on that front.
Mm-hmm. So obviously there have been new defense tech funds coming out over the past year. It seems like it's accelerated. What is the role of the emerging manager in defense tech? Because there have been people investing in it for years. What can emerging managers bring to the table that kind of changes the landscape? Maybe Nicola?
I mean, I feel like this again applies in this space and more broadly for emerging managers. I feel like the fund size is often smaller. The model can be quite different in terms of where managers are willing to take risk. And I feel like that allows you to back a different sort of company as an emerging manager, a company that wouldn't necessarily get funded otherwise. And I think because you're also super aligned with your founders, their success is your fund's success. So in terms of having a great, really super aligned relationship, I think emerging managers are in a different space. I mean, I think maybe we would all agree we hustle quite hard for portfolio companies and sort of celebrate their highs and lows as if they are our own, because they are our own, they're in the fund. And so I think that's something that I would see being quite different from very established funds looking for a different type of outcome from their investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you noticed kind of a shift in which areas of defence tech are being invested in with kind of the emergence of these new managers? Anyone who wants to take it?
Yeah, I think it's important that we are intellectually honest when we talk about new managers in general and defense tech VCs. So there is a line of thought that, hey, we're defense tech, we're dual-use tech, and there's a whole lot of nomenclature that is being used. The problem I see with a lot of emerging managers or even generalists who are, let's call it defense curious, is the wording they use and what's actually behind their actions. An old mentor of mine used to always say, show me your portfolio, I'll tell you your thesis. And a lot of it is not lining up right now. So we have these funds backed by, Nico actually rightly touched on, certain government institutions, and they're saying, yes, we want to do defense. Yet at the end of the day, stuff we hear from our portfolio companies, things you see in the market is, oh, well, we need you to be de-risked and commercial, or we need X, Y, or Z. If you are saying you are doing defense, and this is where language is important, do defense. And for us, when I invest personally out of our fund, and even going back to my angel career, I invest in what I call national security tech, so things that are defense only or defense first. There's nothing wrong with dual use. And in fact, as we've talked about, Nico and I were discussing the other day, there are a lot of funds in the US who do dual use well. In Europe, unfortunately, and this includes the UK here, people use dual use to often soften or make the idea of defense more palatable. And that goes a long way towards restricting or limiting the risk tolerance of investors. Now, when you see large funds or emerging managers or even big institutional organizations like the NATO Innovation Fund using the term dual use and shying away from that and not being open, honest, and ambitious about what their mission is, which is, in my mind, it should be, how do we make the warfighter more lethal, and how do we make the warfighter more resilient, and our societies more resilient as a whole? Full stop. If you cannot be open and honest about that, that is going to limit the risk tolerance. So we can criticize, kind of going back to the initial thing, folks for not getting on the investment side or not doing defense as I've laid out here. But the bigger issue really is institutions, including government and international organizations, not doing the same thing. So emerging managers or even, like I said, defense or dual use curious generalists who are now exploring the ecosystem, that's great. And I welcome everyone to that, because the three funds up here combined, we're not going to catalyze an ecosystem by ourselves. With that said, I think it does a disservice to the entrepreneurs and the broader ecosystem if we're not open and honest about what the goal of defense is. And that is what I've just described, plus most importantly, generating outsized returns for our LPs. But that's my view.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to come in on that as well. I think the thing that I feel I spend my time thinking about a lot of different things from my individual founders through to sort of the future of the sector. But the number one thing I think about is returns for my LPs. And I think that this comes back down to how the fund is modelled, what the thesis looks like, and some of the vagaries you can totally point around language. So what I like to look at is deep moats and broad moats. Can that be a moat in several different sectors? And I think that this is then about how different investors and different founders find fit together. So I think the term dual use is actually super unhelpful, but it's a really great catch-all when you're trying to be brief with an LP, but also give them clarity of what they're about to be pitched. And then you can try and break through that into a deeper conversation about, in this specific fund context, in this specific model, what does it look like? And I think there's something important about having an ecosystem that's quite broad, where the funds are doing slightly different things. They're not all exposed to each other. They're backing different types of founders in the way that emerging managers and specialist funds are also backing different types of founders to generalists. So I hear your point about it being used unhelpfully, but I think there's also an opportunity here for a really healthy ecosystem where there's a spread between defence, what I would like to describe as defence-first technologies, maybe like Palantir, who started defence and move into other adjacent sectors, And then technologies that have the opportunity to be super impactful in lots of sectors, where early contracts with defence and security can both be very lucrative for the company and be really impactful for national security and resilience. So I think that, that's part of why the conference is titled Resilience. It's about the breadth of it. It's not just defence or security, but things like critical national infrastructure as well.
Yeah, and if I just may follow up just very briefly on that, and I have no issue with that at all. In fact, I think that's healthy for the ecosystem, but it's being honest with one's language, because as we all know, especially as early stage investors, the two most important things our founders have, and I really want to foot stomp this, a number of folks in the room have heard me say this before already, but is their time and their money. And if you are wasting their time, be saying that you're doing something that you're intrinsically not willing to actually invest in or not comfortable, then that is where I take issue with it, and that's not good for the